I'm Tom Strange, and I'm curator here at Sigal Music Museum. If this is the first time you've ever been at the museum, raise your hand. Very good. Fortunately, not too many hands anymore, so folks are starting to get the word. We are delighted to have you, just as the part of the normal thing that we say. The South Carolina Humanities and South Carolina Arts Council have strongly supported the museum, including part of the Distinguished Lecture Series for these early lectures that we're doing until we get into November. Obviously, we're not charging the museum anything. This is just to help you understand what's going on. But delighted to have you here. If you are now or ever were a board member of Sigal, put your hand up, please. All right, we have several board members. Thank you. Thank you for coming in and helping support what we're doing. This particular lecture has grown out of a concert and an exhibition that we have planned. So in the future, next March, we're going to be doing a concert featuring one of our most historic keyboards here. The very, very first piano ever commercially made and sold in America is actually here in the Sigal Music Museum. And we're going to couple that with one of the pianos that would have been seen in 1770 when they first come to America, and then 1780 as other pianos began to come here. So to give you an idea of that sonic space, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. But and then of course in 2026, the 250th anniversary of America, and we're going to be contributing what we can from our musical instrument holdings and some other things that we're putting together, to try to tell as many possible stories as we can in a fairly small museum. So I think it's going to be kind of a blowout exhibit. I'm looking forward to putting that together, and we're working on it now. So that led to the idea of patriotic pianos. Alliteration is a wonderful thing. and, and you gotta have a little bit of it. Patriotic pianos. So as you guys, if you Google patriotic piano, what you will see is a whole lot of music, musical compilations of early patriotic pieces that were written. We're going to do something a little different. We're going to actually talk about the instruments themselves. And your next question should be, how can a piano be patriotic? Patriotism, the quality of being patriotic, devotion to and vigorous support for one's country, a highly decorated officer of unquestionable integrity and patriotism. So at first thought you might say, well, thanks, Tom, but pianos can't be patriotic. And this may strictly be true, but they do intersect with our American history in some very interesting ways. That's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. So I start off here with effectively a blank slide, and I'm going to give a little piece of background here that my friend John Watson gave at the Historical Keyboard Society here in June. And I thought it was just so important, and it captured that whole element of what is historically informed performance, what is historic music, what can we do. So let us talk first about history. So what is history? Well, it's represented here by a black bar. History is the unknown. History is unknowable by its very definition. We can't go back. We can't find out. If I were to survey each and every one of you today and ask you why you came and what your interests are and all that, I could put together a pretty comprehensive history of this particular lecture. If I let you go a week, I would struggle to do it in days. If I let you go a year, I won't be able to do it at all. So as we think about history, when we get into the past is effectively unknowable to us. But there is evidence. Evidence comes to us in the form of things that have survived. And they have come forward to us. And here you see a keyboard with a lot of telling marks on it, and this one speaks to us, quite dramatically from its historical perspective. But all it can do is mutely talk. It doesn't have the ability to have a conversation with me and tell me everything that I need to know. All it can say is, this is the witness, this is what I have. What else? Well, I have contemporary documentation. So I have the things that were written at the time. And these things are important. Sometimes when I take what was written at the time and I couple it with the evidence that I have in my hand, then I know enough to know, well, where were they going with this? What's happening? And then, quite honestly, in a number of cases, I'm still going to struggle. After I've put it together as much of this as I can, what do I have left? What I have left is what we call heritage. Heritage is essentially, how do we use this history? How do we interact with it? How do we retell it? What do we do with it? If you've ever been to Colonial Williamsburg, you know that you've seen the little boys, and mom and daddy have bought them a little musket that's an obvious reproduction little musket, and they've got their little felt tricorn hats, and they're marching around and they're having such great fun. And for a little while, some level of them are back in the 17th and 18th centuries thinking about those times that went on. So heritage can be a slippery slope, from trying to copy every element of the past to disregarding all but the most critical features of the present. So here is Colonial Williamsburg. They're all decked out in their costumes. Everybody has done everything to the T. Here's Red Priest, the musical group that they play Vivaldi and historic music, and they dress in wild modern costumes. Red Priest is one level of heritage. Colonial Williamsburg is another, but neither of those is the past. So what can we know about our historical past? Well, we can see how our ancestors dressed and lived. We can smell the aromas they smelled. We can touch the surfaces that they touched, and we can taste the food that they ate. But we struggle to hear the sounds that they heard. And in a certain way, we always will, because that's the one thing that is completely and totally lost to us. So what can we do? Well, you can't use a laser pointer on TV, so we're going to use a prop stick from a fake harpsichord. We can make copies. We can take the evidence that we have and make modern copies so that it works exactly as it appears that it was supposed to work. We can reconstruct parts that had been deconstructed and sort of effectively put it back together. We can do complete restorations and restring it and replace all the perishable elements like the leather hinges and such. Or we can actually encounter instruments that have had minimal action ever done to them, and apparently minimal things that need to be done to them. So artifacts that are still quite nearly in original condition. But in the end, our experience with historical musical instruments will be a collection of attitudes we carry with us, preferences that we have formed ahead of time, and the state of musical production that the preparer has brought the instrument to. So that business of preferences that we have formed ahead of time is really a huge thing in your head. As you listen to music, and even early music, you might hear instruments that sound a little funny, a little different, and it's like, well, why did it sound like that? You have to go back to the times to appreciate why it sounded like that, and we'll hear some of that. We cannot simply hear a historical instrument and expect that we have formed a historically correct opinion of its capabilities until we become familiar with the expectations of the time and what the instrument can do today. That said, the instrument can never speak again to the historical figures that once heard it, and they cannot advise us on the accuracy of the current sound. So in the end, what is left is for the current ear, our ear, that is hearing the instrument to work toward a compromise that accepts limitations while enjoying the new capabilities, some of which are not even possible on modern instruments. And it's really interesting when I sit down with a Stein piano of 1784, a Steinway piano of 2004, and I play those two. They are both wonderful instruments, but they are very different. And in their difference, one can hear at times a better idea of what a composer like Mozart or Rachmaninoff would have had in mind. Mozart often wrote with a very crisp sort of auditory space, meaning that he wanted the notes to stand apart. When you get that on one of our big resonant sonorous Steinway pianos, you lose a little bit of that. On the other hand, Rachmaninoff does not work on a 1784 Stein piano, and it never will. It's interesting how poorly they are backwards compatible, but how often we tend to think, well, they're forwards compatible. There's nothing wrong with the Goldberg variations by Glenn Gould on the Steinway piano. But if you want to hear what Bach had in mind, you need to hear it well done on a harpsichord. So, taking off onto America, this is the only instrument that I'm going to show you that isn't actually in the collection here at Sigal. And it shouldn't be. It should be exactly where it is because it's in the same home that it's always been in. So this is the first piano ever made in America. It wasn't made for sale. This was made by request. It was made by an organ builder named John Clem, Johann Clem, who had Americanized his name, and he made it in 1745, plus or minus a year. A copy of this was recently completed by John Watson and Tom Winter so that the piano can be heard again. Why would we make a copy? Because there is all but one of these. There's not another like this ever anywhere in the world. And as you know, a stringed instrument under tension is always going to be undergoing, some stresses and strains. It was obviously decided that they were not going to try to restore, quote, make this thing play again. Let's make an exact copy. So remember what I said, the levels that we can go through. We can make a copy and we can hear it from the copy. This is an early recording of this, actually the very first recording made of it after the copy was finished. And so the sound quality is not as good as it could be, and a much better recording will be coming along, but let's just listen to this for a moment. So when you heard that transition, what happened was this thing has a little slider on it. And so when the hammer strikes the string, one side of the hammer is a little metal bar that's going to make metal on metal. And then the other side is the first use of leather in a piano to hit the string. And so it makes a much softer sound. The actual sound of this instrument is far superior to what you just heard. But that gives you an idea of what this instrument was able to do. It was made for the Moravian Society, in particular for the quarantine area for the children who had smallpox at the time. Smallpox was raging through southern Pennsylvania and would do so for quite some little while. So as the kids are recuperating, they would have this music played while they're in their beds. So a kind of a neat little story. And when the piano was no longer a viable instrument, they just left it in place. Being the Moravian Society, there was no need to adjust it or move it or even much talk about it. So as it turned out, by the time real historians began to think about this thing, most of its history had been lost. And we had to reconstruct it from the basic principles of what we found in the instrument. So again, the evidence telling it's as much of the story as we can get, and then we put together the evidence with the documentation. We say, now we know something about this. So we're going to zoom ahead just a touch. Middle of the 18th century in America, this spinet harpsichord came into Old Haddam, Connecticut, brand new, from the workshops of Jacob Kirkman, the largest harpsichord maker in the world at that time. And Kirkman had found out that in America, they really like these spinets. They'll buy those. They're not going to buy the bigger harpsichords. We'll make those and send them in. And so there is one from 1748 and two from 1750 here in America that apparently have always been here. They came in new. It would have been a real thing to have this, and particularly in Old Haddam, Connecticut. It would have been the only keyboard instrument in town, and kind of a symbol of power and authority for Hezekiah Brainerd, who was one of the founders of the town. So when we say patriotic piano, well, here's one that's patriotic because it's a harpsichord meant to show where it's at and why it's at. A very beautiful instrument. It has a long story. So here it is, actually in 1899, in the Connecticut Magazine, where they had profiled the Brainerd family among others, and they happened to pick out the spinet, one of the first instruments to ever come into America. And it is an early entrance, but certainly not the first. The young lady down here is Helen Goss. This was made in 1912. She was 16 years old at the time, and she was the pretty little neighbor girl. And they dressed her up in her mom's wedding dress and took all of these pictures. And then ladies upstairs would hand color these photographs, and they would sell them. And you can buy these on eBay and other places, even now. Of course, we have a full collection there were 5 prints actually made from the spinet. And, neat that exists. The other thing that exists is that one of the relatives of the Brainerds, Helen Brainerd Peck, in the late 19th century, encountered the spinet. She was a poet, and she was so moved by this little instrument that she wrote a poem about it. The last verse being, "Now untouched, the keys lie hid, silence sleeps beneath the lid, and the voiceless spinet seems haunted with refrains of song that to other days belong, and eloquent of olden dreams." I have restored this instrument, so that part, as you remember the little square, what can we do? Well, we can restore the instruments, and we can honor the instrument and pick the materials that they would have picked. This one has been requilled in actual crow quill and raven in the bass. And we can hear a very nice version of that. So it has a big voice for such a small instrument. You see one of our little early spinets here, this one from 1712, and then William Harris spinet. We have a spinet expert from Williamsburg will be here in November to go through our Harris spinets because we have one of the larger representations of that family that exists in the world. So the first square pianos. The first square piano was actually brought about by John Zumpy in London, and he got one of the very first ones to Queen Charlotte, and she absolutely loved it. And the popularity of this little square piano, it's not actually square, of course, it's fairly rectangular looking, but it became very, very popular very, very quickly. He got all of his friends that he knew as cabinet makers to leave off cabinet making and come make these pianos. So Pullman and Beck step right in, and they start making these pianos. And of course, we have a Pullman and a Beck from that period where he's getting everything going. By 1775, there's 1,500 of these in London alone, and they're going into St. Petersburg and Paris, and even coming to America. And so the piano moves from a thing that's kind of a plaything of princes and kings, not much known in the world, to something that's sort of mainstream. And it won't take long before other people seeing these little squares say, well, it would be also nice to have a larger piano, the larger forms being built sort of around the shape of harpsichords. So that's what we now think of as a grand piano. Grand simply means large. These small pianos were petite, small instruments. They got the name square piano because they had square corners. But it's taking off. It's really happening. The spinet harpsichord was popular from the last half of the 17th century through the third quarter of the 18th century. It was a perfect size for homes. But the appearance of the square piano quickly displaces spinets after 1780, and by 1790 they become very, very uncommon. By 1800, along with the regular harpsichords, no one is really making them. We squeezed out at least one in America, again in southern Pennsylvania, by a builder who obviously had been requested to build a spinet for another Moravian church. So kind of an interesting thing to have happen. In 1770, David Proper, an organist and merchant who had just come to America, advertises that he had for sale musical instruments, among which is a very fine-toned harpsichord and a forte piano, all which he disposes at Philip Killick's. So the little piano that he would have had would have been one of these little early Zumpy pianos, possibly Pullman or Beck, but almost certainly Zumpy, because we know a little bit about Proper and where he was getting things from. We have a little 1770 Zumpy, and that's the one that's going to be featured in one of these upcoming concerts here in March. But I thought you might like to just hear what such a piano from the very beginning would sound like. A tiny pinpoint-like voice. In 15 years, such a sound would have been very much supplanted by a far larger sound. But remember what I said, they were very popular. They were selling like hotcakes. So in 1770, there was an expectation for a sound that these pianos met. And by 1785, we're expecting a somewhat different sound. That's how fast things were changing. And that's an important point to think about as you say, well, I'm going to calibrate myself and I'm going to understand and appreciate, 18th century music. It ain't all the same. In fact, over very short periods of time, it could change rather dramatically. So, noble souls, as you want to do this and make this work, remember that you might have to make several adjustments as you're thinking about things. In 1774, John Shebley, who was an organ maker, he had left Philadelphia and had come to New York, and he advertises for sale. In the note, he has ready for sale one neat chamber organ, one hammer spinet, and one common spinet. Now, a common spinet is this. That's what he meant. Hammer spinet must surely be a little square piano. In fact, everybody was so certain of that, if you look it up in Grove, it'll say that exactly. It's a square piano. Until I found this at auction. This is a little spinet that was never a spinet harpsichord. This was always a spinet intended to have hammers. We're calling it spinet with hammers right now. It has a 4.5 octave organ compass. It was clearly made before 1820, and there's a part of me that wonders, are we looking at a John Shebley instrument here? In order to find out the rest of the story, I'm going to have to rather carefully deconstruct part of it to get in. Before I do that, I like to put a little team together, and my teams have been pretty busy recently. So we haven't actually gotten together to do the forensic work on this, but this is going to be fun. I think there's something here. It's possibly a surviving example, could be by one of these itinerant builders, but it certainly is interesting, and it does call into mind that idea that the spinet as a shape was also important to people because somebody has gone and made a piano in that very format. So, in one of the more well-known advertisements from colonial America, John Barrett advertised a new instrument, writing, John Barrett, joiner and instrument maker, has just finished for sale an extraordinary fine instrument by the name of pianoforte of mahogany in the manner of a harpsichord with hammers and several changes. So when he says in the manner of a harpsichord, what is he saying? He's trying to tell you it looks like a harpsichord. What did the historians that have read this say? Oh, he made a square piano. Really? You thought that? But they did, and these were noted experts. They came in, and it's in Grove. So speculation about the piano has informed every introduction to the American piano since the 19th century. But we'd never seen the instrument, and we didn't expect to. Surely such a thing would be lost. Why do we think that? Well, I'll tell you that in a moment. So Michael Hillegas in Philadelphia, he ran the first music store there, and he even sold square pianos there in 1774. He says he's got a couple for sale. There's a high probability that Hillegas knew Barrett before accepting the role of treasurer of the Continental Army. John Adams wrote of Hillegas in September of 1775, Mr. Hillegas, Mr. Owen Biddle, Mr. Rittenhouse, we will hear from him, and Captain Faulkner were with me. Hillegas is one of our continental treasurers, is a great musician, talks perpetually of the forte and piano, of Handel, etc., songs and tunes he plays upon the fiddle. Rittenhouse is a mechanic, a mathematician, a philosopher, and an astronomer. So you know what Michael Hillegas was doing. He has encountered this thing that Barrett has built, and it's exciting. Plus the fact that he's also got the smaller instruments in his shop. So yes, he would have been talking perpetually of the forte and piano, of the pianoforte. And Adams would have been the first to have gone like y'all and gone, oh God, when will he shut up? So in 2021, an instrument surfaced with a provenance back to early southern Pennsylvania and bearing the name of John Barrett London, on a fragment of the rest plank veneer removed by Philip Belt in 1973. And here you see it. He spelled the J with an I, which would have been very common at the time. And when he says London, what he's trying to say is what every musical instrument maker at that time and later would say until about 1820, from London, trained in London. You want to make sure people know that you have a London connection. They're not going to buy it if it's homegrown. They want the real deal, and they want people who have come from London. He obviously went to London. He then went on to Lisbon, Portugal. We're not sure how long he was in Lisbon, but he came from Lisbon to America in 1770 to make spinets and harpsichords. He leaves us a notice. One of the reasons that this piano wasn't flagged back in the 70s and everybody going, here's the Barent, was that it's spelled differently. As it turns out, every time we encountered Barent's name in any of the notices or legal papers from Philadelphia, it's spelled differently. He likely didn't know how to spell his name or was still in the process of figuring out how to spell it in an Americanized way. But he ultimately winds up with B-R-E-N-D-T, no H, as the thing on his will. But it's always spelled differently. The key here was that we went through this piano and really tore through it, and what we found was all American woods. Tulip poplar for the key levers and the sides of the instrument, southern yellow pine for the structural elements, and covered in mahogany in this very plain and simple way. There is absolutely no possibility that an instrument this dull and ugly would have been made in London and sold. But guys, this piano is so like the ones that are being contemporarily made in London at this time by the very first guy to bring forth the grand pianoforte, America's Backers. So he's the first guy to make the London style grand pianoforte, and the dimensions are almost on top of each other. I have very good reason to believe that Barent knew Backers, had worked with Backers while he was in London, and that's where some of this is coming from. Probably was still in touch with him, but there were several things that Backers did that Barent did very differently, and so he's working it through. He's making it up on his own, and he's doing the very best job that he possibly can to bring forward this piano. Unfortunately, he brings it out in March of 1775, and on April 19th, we have the Battle of Lexington and Concord. This is a contemporary painting supposedly made the next day after the battle, so about as authentic as we're ever going to see. And after this battle, all thought of frivolous things, musical instruments and such, began to leave the mind of Americans as we prepared for this coming revolution and independence. So for Barent, this would have been rather bad news. But if he hadn't already sold the piano, it's going to be a struggle to buy it. He himself went into the Continental Army, served his time, came out as a private, and then in 1780 he dies of the yellow fever in September of 1780. So it's unlikely that he would have had any time to make any more pianos, and we don't think it happened. The action that we find from the remains of this piano had been very heavily modified. So this is a drawing here, and what it shows is a single wire here that's going to push up on the butt of this jack and throw the hammer up at the string. This is called the English single action, and it is as simple as it gets. Why would you go from what was clearly an English grand piano action by Barent to this? The mystery, was pretty strong, but another fellow emerges at this time that's probably the reason for this, and his name was James Juan. And so James Juan had come to America, had come to Boston before the war. He was making violin bows and some other things. And when the war broke out, he was a loyalist, so he went to the West Indies and he set out the war. Now it's 1783, the war has been officially declared over, and he returns, comes back to Boston, and he says that he informs the public that he makes the great North American forte pianos, meaning the large North American forte pianos, the mechanical part of which is entirely his own invention and so simple that it is the easiest thing to keep them in order. Now, Johann was not a piano builder. If you want to be a piano builder, it's not something that you simply, go in the shop one day and say, "Let me build a piano." That won't work. You won't make much of anything. So for somebody to say that they're a builder, they have to have worked with a builder, or they've got to have actually built maybe 10 or 15 things of these before it comes along. So for him to say this and then to disappear, never actually doesn't completely disappear. We just never hear of him associated with instruments anymore. He goes and gets himself into trouble several times with money, writing to the people who were asking for his money back that, "I told you I couldn't pay you," and other things like that. So it's like, well, that's my excuse. I told you I couldn't pay you. He was a ne'er-do-well, and that's the way he passed life. But it's a high probability that he got hold of this piano, possibly never having been sold, made a modification, and then tried to sell it for his own. The piano has an oval place for the name in the front. It looks like something might have been there. Whatever was there has been sponged away a long time ago, and that would have been Johann, taking that out. So with this piano, we can hear a little bit of it. This one actually has a fairly nice voice, much brighter than the little Zumpies, and a lot more forward projecting. So I think it'll be interesting to you when you can come back for the concert and hear the difference over just 5 years of what's going on. One of the things that we can do as curators and researchers is, what does the instrument look like? And that's your first idea of how old is this thing? So whenever we see these trestle stands like this, we know we're talking about a fairly early instrument. Quite often, you'll notice that you see this little place right here. There's normally an F sharp there. It's not there. When that's not missing, I know that piano was made before 1780, because after 1780, the music needs it badly enough that they're going to go do something about it, and the F sharp reappears. But when we see that, we see this one on a little French frame. It says that it was made in, the original name board said Abraham and Jacob Kirkman, 1797. So I'm looking at it and I'm going, the F sharp is missing. How can it be 1797? Let's look at the date again. And sure enough, the 17 part is good, the 7 part is good, but that 9 looks like a kindergartner has made it. What has happened? Somebody had an old piano and they wanted to sell it for a slightly newer piano. So they've gone in there and they've gone, and they tried to put a 9 in place. This happens all the time with these early pianos. What did we do? I got a calligrapher in London who is an expert at this to replicate the other 7. So now it says 1777. That was the true date for this piano. But it's interesting, that you have all these little visual clues that you're looking at to say, well, what have I got? When it doesn't hold together, there's always a reason. And one of the interesting parts about that Barrett piano, the deeper we dug, the better the story got. And typically, if you've got a fake or a fraud in front of you, deeper you look, the worse. The worse the whole thing comes together. This is a little anonymous piano, circa 1790, built by a craftsman who had seen enough pianos to attempt to make one. He's actually not done a very bad job at all, but it's a 1 string per note kind of piano, very simple sort of action. And at one time it was used on a boat. It probably was originally used on a boat. It has what looks like original hardware here at the bottom, with little brackets that screw it down to the floor. Why do you need to be screwed down to the floor? Nobody's going to steal this thing. You need to screw it down on the floor when you're on a boat and it's rocking like this. And so, a neat, early American instrument. As you guys remember, the Erie Canal and all of that, using the waterways is one of the first ways that commerce really begins to get going in America. So here from early America, a little instrument that was used to entertain people while they were passengers on one of these boats. We moved to Charles Taws. Charles had come to America in 1786 to make his fortune. He comes to New York first, and he finds that in New York, gosh, it's all commerce and there's no entertainment and nobody's buying musical instruments and nobody seems to want to talk about musical instruments. So then he went to Philadelphia, where it's much more culturally inclined and you can actually get a business started. And he started his business importing musical instruments, including pianos, and selling them. In 1791, he decided, instead of importing them, I'm going to make them. And so he had already been an organ builder and a musical instrument builder when he came to America. He was trained in this, and this was something that he could do. And so he launches into building these pianos. So between 1791 and 94, he made approximately 6 pianos a year. This one, in particular, was made for David Rittenhouse. So we remember that Adams had spoken of Rittenhouse. Here he is, with his diagrams and his telescope. Rittenhouse was one of the most important scientists that we had in America in the 18th century, along with Franklin. These guys would all get together over at Rittenhouse's place every Wednesday evening, and they would talk natural history and politics and musical theater. Francis Hopkinson designed the flag in honor of his friend Rittenhouse. This is not something that everybody knows, but where did the stars on a blue field come from? Well, that's in honor of Rittenhouse, the astronomer. And so he incorporates that, and we picked up on it, and of course we've used it ever since. One of the neat parts of this one, as I dug through it, I find a signature on the inside of the action, and I was astonished. So here is the signature, Elizabeth Taws, her board. She has signed the inside of the action because she has made this part. In fact, there's clear evidence that she made the whole action, made it, numbered it, and put it all together. We knew that the wives would help with various aspects of putting a piano together, like overwinding the strings and maybe putting silk in places if you need it. But here's an example of the wife with 2 little ones in tow in the shop, building alongside her husband. So when I introduce that piano today, rather than say, here's a Charles Taws, it's a Charles and Elizabeth Taws, because she's clearly part of the building tradition here. Charles Taws made about 24 pianos during his building time, and of these, 12 have survived. Now, if you know anything about the survival rate of these early instruments, it's typically 4 to 5%. If they were poorly built, sometimes none. If they're very, very nice looking and such, we might get 20 or so percent. A 50% survival rate, because he's building for the founding fathers. And almost all of these pianos that have survived, all but one, are connected with one of the founding fathers whose stuff never went out of date because people just took care of it. So that's pretty neat. Weights and Charters, 1796, they have gotten started here in America. They came from London to build in New York, and Waits had been an apprentice of Thomas Dodds when he first came to America. He was born in England. Dodds built in New York between 1791 and 95 and sold a piano to George Washington for Nellie Custis's use, which would have been one of Waits' efforts for Dodds. This weights and charts instrument likely dates from early in the partnership, and what we say is, it says weights and charters, number 19 Berkeley Street, London. But there is no Berkeley Street in London. Berkeley Street is in New York City. The calligrapher was intended to say from London there, and later pianos will either say New York or from London. He missed it. It happens. But that's another one of those examples where as you first look at it, you say, oh, well, this is a London-made piano. No, this is very much an American piano that carries, this little artifact with it. And once again, connected with history, because the builder of this was a builder for the first president. Weights and charters, the square pianos dated to the election of John Adams. This was a big thing. We're going through an election period now, and it was close then, and it's close now. And the idea was, who's voting for who. And so the Northeast were all for Adams, and the South were all for Jefferson. And it actually took many votes before Jefferson would finally lose to Adams the first time, and then pick it up again in 1800. So Adams had a one-term presidency. But New York was playing a pivotal role, because from 1786 to 1796, New York City has all but doubled in size. That commerce thing is really working for them. And with that many people, commerce is starting to really build. So now New York is becoming a center of culture and learning and understanding, along with being a high manufacturing place. In southern Pennsylvania, this little piano appears with, it's called the Shooting Box Farm Piano because it's anonymous in its construction, and it's actually kind of a cobbled together of several things, several concepts, including possibly taking a piano and repurposing it. But you see this little action here where you hit the hammer, this hits a little rail in the back and it throws the hammer up. This is the Stoss mechanic, is what we call it, push mechanic. And this is very much a German sort of thing. So, the Germans are starting to come over in high concentrations. They're coming into Pennsylvania, and then they're coming into Northern Virginia. And this one was built in Northern Virginia as an instrument probably for a German family. Isaac Hawkins, I'm actually going to go to Germany in 2.5 weeks and talk a lot about the origins of the upright piano. But Hawkins and Thomas Jefferson became involved with each other. They actually became somewhat friends for a while. Hawkins was not primarily a maker of musical instruments, but he had come up with this idea for an upright piano, and he was very inventive. Inside these pianos are probably more inventions per creation than any other piano that exists. Unfortunately, many of the inventions were not carried through to a success, and so they don't actually work as well as they should have. But he had Jefferson all excited. Martha Jefferson, the daughter, had claimed that she preferred it to any keyboard instrument she had ever heard. And so Sigal, the only 4 Hawkins pianos have survived. We have 2 because Marla was fascinated by this person, and we're delighted that we can show those and talk about them. Nobody else has that ability, so it's kind of neat. On the inside, one of the inventions is a schematic for a full iron frame. And this is the very first piano to ever have a full iron frame. But it's not the first piano to have a successful full iron frame, because if I keep working, there's no wood that does any of the supporting. This diagram shows you where all the steel is. And then on the inside, you can see, here it is, the soundboard sort of floating in this frame, and there's nothing else around it. These are tension bars. There's the tension bar at the top, so it's like a suspension bridge. Structurally, this is not a bad idea. But like the Liberty Bridge, as the wind blows and you walk across it, there's a little bit of wiggle, right? You can feel a little something. It's not going to break, it's not going to come down, but there's a little bit of wiggle, and there should be. But in a piano, we can't stand a little bit of wiggle. And the problem with the Hawkins pianos were they would not stay in tune. The reason for that is you cannot make an iron frame composite style with tension bars like that. You've got to cast the darn thing. It's got to be made out of a material that does not flex. Cast iron does not flex. And so cast iron was the very, very first material that was ever chosen by Alpheus Babcock. And it's still the only thing that we use. There's no other alloy that's quite like cast iron. All the wood that we see in the bottom of the piano is there to make sure that the cast iron can never twist, because if it twists, it will break. It's like a china teacup. You can't bend it. And so it's important that it always hold its shape. Hawkins didn't know this, so he had a great idea. He just needed a little bit of metallurgical experience to know, well, let's do this. On the name board, he's got John Isaac Hawkins, inventor, patentee, London. When he was in Philadelphia, they looked like this. Hawkins invented and made patent 1801 Philadelphia. There's a very, very high probability that our little Hawkins piano once had this sort of a name right there. It said Philadelphia. There's a lot of evidence that this board has been changed out, contemporary with the piano, because Hawkins went back to London in 1803 to claim a legacy and was successful. And so here he is with two of these pianos made in Philadelphia. Who in London is going to buy a piano made in Philadelphia? They're not doing it. So this board was remade. It's in satin wood. This board is in maple. The side pieces are still in maple. This is the only satin wood on this piano. Satin wood was something that you could get in London. The rest of the woods on the inside of this piano are American. So this piano was made in Philadelphia, relabeled for London because I want to get rid of it. So in the Jeffersonian era, from 1800 to 1808, piano making saw the first large expansion in America. The Embargo Act of 1807 was a general trade embargo on all foreign nations enacted by the United States Congress. It's a non-importation act. And, it was to, protect American manufacturing and make sure that other people felt the pain and the suffering of this, pressing American troops and sailors into British ships. That was, a thing that was really worrying them. So, the embargoes ran up to the War of 1812. And so from 1812 to December of 1814, we're at war, nothing is coming in. And all during this time, American manufacturer is starting to learn how to really pump it out. By 1815, when the era of good feelings would return, and we were back in good with England, well, we were able to make a lot of things ourselves. And buying an American piano had gone from, well, I guess they couldn't afford better, to, oh yeah, well, my sister's got one of those. So that's an important historical point of how history and the instruments, kind of come together. George Guilford, he ran a shop, and he was one of the first guys that said, well, I'm going to run a musical emporium, and I'm going to sell lots and lots of pianos. And he engaged a family that had just come over from England to make their fortune, John Kearsing and his building sons, to make pianos of a very high quality between 1804 and 1810. Guilford was reasonably successful. 4 of these Guilford pianos have survived. I've restored 2 of them. One of them is here at Sigal, and we're delighted to have it because Kearsing was a very, very fine maker. And so he's come to America. What's he doing? He's helping us with that beginning of the piano trade here. Benjamin Crahor and Louis Babcock in Boston. Crahor was one of the first builders of pianos in Boston, and we don't hear much about him until this particular period when he teams up with the Babcocks. The Babcocks then later make their own firm, and Crahor works for them. And that's when we start to really see these pianos showing up. We're the only people that have one that says Craycore and Babcock has that very early partnership on the label. Lovely piano. This one is fully restored. John Penniman, John Ritto Penniman, did the name board in gouache, which is a very unusual choice for painting on wood. But he put it in gouache and then varnished over it. And subsequent platers have left the decorations alone, so the name board is in really great shape. This is a beautiful sounding piano. William and Adam Bent comes right after they were apprentices of Craycore, and they set up their shop in downtown Boston to build instruments. The Bent pianos, particularly William and Adam Bent, were very, very nicely made. And we've only recently been able to get one of these. So it's still in Baltimore, but it's going to be coming down as soon as I get the truck up there to get it. Penniman also painted this name board. So we can see that Penniman has got a little side business, doing name boards for people. He also did this watercolor of a piano in the form of a spinet. So this piano was never produced. There's no evidence that it ever actually came about. But it's such a lovely little drawing that it has survived, and kind of neat that we can still see thoughts about what they were considering. John Wind in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, so again, southern Pennsylvania, a craftsman who, because of the local need, said, oh, okay, well, my father was an organ maker. I have experience with this. Let's see if we can do pianos. And so he came together with some other folks, and they began making these pianos. Another one of those where 6 have survived. We have 2 in the museum. Absolutely beautiful name boards, as you can see, elaborately painted. And we think that the decorator, Jacob Eichholz, who was also a painter, did these. He listed Dahl and Wind in his receipt book, so clearly he was doing something for the Winds. And then if you go so far as to look at the paintings by Eichholz, you can see that there are similarities in like the way the flowers are made that would convince you that this is probably Eichholz. I say all that because you would think that we must know those beautiful London pianos and who made those, but in fact that stuff is the hardest information to come across. They never had notices because they never needed to, and there's no receipt books or anything left. So we don't know who painted those things in London. John Guide came over in 1797. We have one of the most extensive collections of Guide material, and I wrote the book on John Guide, so that was fun to do. And there it is. In case you were wondering, this is the piano that we're talking about. It even includes a little lightning bug on the stem. Insects on pianos are very rare, but this one's got a little lightning bug on it, and that's kind of fun. The Guides also were one of the first to bring out the Star Spangled Banner. After that was written, it became very, very popular, and they brought out a version along with Isaac Carr and others to get it published and get it around. It wasn't actually adopted as our national anthem until the 1930s, and where it had a lot of competition, by the way. But here it is showing up, and it made everybody a lot of money at the time. John Guide Jr. Opens up on his own in 1815. And we have this lovely little square piano that we used at the Historical Keyboard Society. This little piano that we have for many years was at a girls' school in New York. And on the bottom of the shade board, there's a little board that sits on top that comes right up, we find that the girls have signed their names. So Ann Liv Gerlich, Tyrone, Jane Arnold, Tyrone, Sarah Compton, Bradford, B.S. Dale, Tyrone, New York. Jane Arnold died in 1846 at the age of 20. I could find her in the genealogy books. And Bradford was not known by that name until 1836. So we get an idea of when these girls, they were probably 13 or 14 years old at this time. And, they've left behind just a little symbol of who they were. As married ladies know, once you marry and your last name changes, then it's the devil, to find the genealogy at that point, unless somebody has been very careful with the records. James Stewart came to America in 1812, right before the War of 1812. Fortunately, he made it in just in time. He joined his brother Adam, and they built in Baltimore, particularly James Stewart building in Baltimore until 1819. The first Great Depression in America was in 1819, when effectively the bill for the War of 1812 plus other things kind of came due, and money got tight real fast, and so it was our first crash, our first experience with any kind of a downturn. Um, he had to leave Baltimore. He went to Philadelphia and then to Boston, and it's in Boston that James Stewart really makes his claim to fame in America, because he got in ultimately with young Jonas Chickering, started up a business with Chickering, and that would launch Chickering Piano, which ran into the 1960s. Downstairs, you'll see a piano, Loudon Brothers, Philadelphia, 1824. We call it the Lafayette piano because this piano was made specifically for the arrival of the Marquis de Lafayette. He had been with Washington all through the war. And once the war was over, he went back to France. He participated in their revolutionary activities until it got ugly, and then he left Paris. Got in trouble with the politicians and the law in Prussia, and got thrown in jail. And it was three guys from Pendleton, South Carolina, who were over there at the time that sprung him out of jail. So the Marquis thought a lot of America. They snuck him out and got him back across the border. And you can read all about that at the historic house over there in Pendleton. So this piano showed up for auction right before we were going to open Sounds of America, and I said, I gotta have that. So we got it. Steve Bickle generously bought this one for the use of the museum, and it's the only thing that looks like this. No other piano by Loud ever looked like this because it was made particularly for the Marquis. When he returns in 1824, it's been 40 years. It's the biggest thing that's ever happened in America. And among other things, marches were written in his honor. Here's a march, the Lafayette Welcome, and another Lafayette Welcome. These marches kind of go on and on. We're going to take this piano to Charleston in March of this year, March the 14th, which is the 200th anniversary of him coming to Charleston on his grand tour, and we're going to play it at the Fireproof Building, the South Carolina Historical Society building, that evening as part of the festivities, because this is a piano that Lafayette would have at least known of. We have no reason to believe he was a pianist, but people would have played it for him, and it was for his personal use. The guys also made one for his personal use, but that one seems to be lost at this point. So we're going to zoom ahead just a little bit and talk about 1828. So in 1828, there were factions going on. We talk about the political divide today, but believe me when I say that the political divides have been very, very strong in the past as well. The South wanted to embarrass the North, and particularly they didn't want John Quincy Adams to be president. John Quincy Adams had certain abolitionist tendencies that they didn't care for. So they crafted a tariff that they knew would never pass because it was just too awful. A 38% tariff on imports of finished goods, a 45% tariff on imports of raw materials, and that part particularly including wool this time, directed against the North. What they knew would happen was this tariff would come up for a vote. It would be voted down. It would be embarrassing for the Democrats and for Adams, and they could use that. So they put the bill forward. And not everybody got the message. People voted for it. And by a fairly narrow margin, it passed. And it's like, oh God, what have we done? So the South, in particular, was very upset with this. What it meant was, in the South, we're very agricultural. So we're sending raw materials over there, and they're sending us money, and then we buy their goods, and we bring it back. So a strong import business and export business is very important to the South. And this kills it. So as far as we were concerned, you guys have just dumped on us, and I think it's time to secede. And in fact, the troops were marching in Charleston, and things were ready to happen. As it turned out, by the time the troops were marching, Andrew Jackson was then president, and he said, "Wait, we're going to change this. We're going to change this. Don't worry." But before that happened, the feelings of the South toward the North were of pure and utter hatred. So when we encounter an instrument like this, Robert and William Nunn's of New York, a unicorn-style piano, it was created specifically to come into the South, built in New York City, but it has one string per note, and a piano that's made particularly for export, where piano tuners are few and far between, and we can sell this and people can enjoy it for a long period of time. So a lot of their business, almost all of their business, as it turned out, was in the American South, and this piano was very popular. There it is there. That's why it's up here. Many surviving Nuns pianos that came to the South when they were new are found with their names erased. And here's an example of that. Here are 3 instruments by Nuns and Clark from that 1829-1830 time period, where the name has either been erased or a mirror has been put in place or something to take away the name New York, because we can't have the ladies seeing that. We speculate that a little cottage industry started up. Nuns in particular was easy to erase. The way they made their decals, they had a pretty wood underneath, and you could take it away and keep the decorative border on the outside if you wanted to, but have that name gone. John Guide or William Guide pianos from the time was harder to take the decal off, and underneath was less pretty wood. So I found a couple of guides where they started scraping on it, and then they stopped because it says, well, this looks terrible. But why was it happening? History showing itself again. This tariff of abominations was real and important. So by 1833, we've got it fixed. If you go downstairs and you look at the Nuns piano downstairs from 1834, you'll notice everything is intact. Well, we're starting to feel okay again. They've made it right for us, and Jackson was able to, get the right legislation in place so that the South had a lot of the burden relieved from it, and that was actually improved a little bit. But I think it's neat to see that. Now, among our presidents, one of the most interesting times in the White House was the Lincoln presidency. During the presidency, their little son Willie died, and Mary Todd Lincoln took it hard, and she took to spiritualism to try to get back in contact with her little son. Abraham didn't think much of it, but he would often go to these seances and spiritual encounters with his wife to make sure that they weren't taking advantage of her in some way. And so, the stories circulate. So there is a story out there, almost contemporary to the time, that goes like this. Lincoln's at one of these things, and during a memorable session, a possessed piano rocked and jumped so much that Lincoln supposedly sat on it to attempt to settle it back down. Now, whether this is true or not, I can't say. But it certainly is interesting, and one could imagine Lincoln having a good time. He would have been the kind of guy that would have jumped up on the darn thing and see if he could settle it back. Pianos generate probably more stories than anything else, any other object that you can think of. Following the entry of the federal troops into Columbia, South Carolina, the governor, Andrew McGrath, hurriedly moved the capital to Union, South Carolina. He could get there in a couple of days, and the federal troops were already through that part of the state, and they'd never gone into Union because on the days that they were coming in, the river had risen, and they couldn't get through. So he went to the Dawkins house for about 2 weeks before South Carolina was declared captured, and it became part of the Union again. And while he was there, this piano was there with him. At the Dawkins house was this Robert Nunsen Clark piano, built to come into the South. The piano would have made the final days for Governor McGrath a little more possible, or passable, I should have said. And this piano is infamous for another reason. So Tim Marshall, my compatriot in arms, who we've moved pianos for 30 years together, we had understood that there was some help going to be there to move this piano. We had to go down some stairs. And as it turned out, not so much. But we'd driven to Union. So we were going to, we were meant. So this is an 1851 piano. My guess is that it weighs the better part of 300 pounds. And for two guys that are physicists and not bodybuilders or football players, we just about busted a gut. And when we finished moving this piano, we looked at each other and had a little pact and said, never again. No more of those big ones. We'll talk about the little stuff. A little spin it like this, I won't kill you. These things are crushers. This is the inside, and it has this wonderful tube running down diagonally along the lowest bass string. This was actually an invention by a fellow by the name of John Dwight, and it's actually one of the more important things that were ever invented. The full iron frame already exists, but it's under patent, and Chickering has it, and Chickering is not going to let go of it until the patent expires. And in 1851, it's still got 2 years left on it. So they built this piano with this iron tube to take the place of having an iron frame. As soon as that patent expired, boom, everybody adopts the full iron frame. That's when it shows up in pianos. And Tim and I know that we don't touch those without pros. Not going to do it. But even this one had enough of a chunkiness that we felt it when we went down those stairs. Pianos have played a part in the growth and development of America since before it was founded. Companions, inspirations, objects onto which history itself was written. They made a deep impression on many former leaders. Harry Truman was quoted as saying, "If I had been a good pianist, I never would have become president. I missed being a musician, and the real and only reason I missed being one is because I wasn't good enough." Some still feel it was a pity that he was so slow to improve. But with that, I will say thank you for attending this lecture.